Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Bulimia Sucks. I'm your host, Kate Hudson-Hall, and thank you for listening. Now, this is a platform for people to share relatable and uplifting and inspiring conversations based on an eating disorder. And episodes will include their personal stories of what they've been through with their struggles with their eating disorder. And also we talk to people that help others with eating disorders. So it's very exciting. And I wanted to just tell you about my coloring books if you hadn't heard about them. So they are out now on Amazon. And there is a bulimia, an anorexia, a binge eating, and also an anxiety stress relieving coloring book. And they have 35 plus relaxing, easy to color patterns with inspiring quotes of wisdom. And then on the opposite page, there is motivational questions that you can ask yourself and learn from with regards to that quote that's going to help you move forward in your recovery. So it was very therapeutic for me to make these, and I hope that you enjoy them and would like to check them out on Amazon. So if you just put my name into Amazon, they will come up. And also, as a therapist, I created a free Bulimia Sucks course to help you to get started on your recovery path. So if you go to my website, you can find out more about that, which is katehudson-hall.com. And I have a sign-up form, so which will take you straight to the course. So check that out also. Now, our guest today, I'm very excited, is Dawn Cuckow. Now, Dawn is an author and a nutritional therapist, and she knows from experience how hard it is to eat healthily when your body is just telling you to reach out for those cookies. But it doesn't have to be that way. She helps her clients bring their bodies into balance to reduce or eliminate cravings and the desire to overeat. So they don't need to be massive. You don't need massive willpower to eat healthily. So we're going to be talking about that. And Dawn is also going to share with us her own struggles with an eating disorder and talk about nutritional thoughts, talk about nutrition and what we can learn about nutrition to help all of us in our lifestyles and our forward steps in our recovery. And also Dawn is going to be talking about her recently launched best-selling book, The Body Effect. So welcome, Dawn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Kate.
It's amazing to have you here.
Thank you.
So let's start off. Now, do you have a funny story that you could share with us?
Well, I have quite a lot of funny stories around food, but there's one that still makes me smile. Some years ago, I went into my local supermarket and the manager came over to me and said, "Can I help you?" I thought, well, this is strange. You don't normally get this service in a supermarket. So I was a little baffled. And I said to him, well, you could get me some onions. So he looked at me really surprised, but off he went. And he came back with the onions. And then we got talking, and it turned out that he thought I was the auditor, not a shopper.
Oh, darn it. You could have got him to do all your shopping for you.
I should have given him a longer list to start with, shouldn't I? So just handed him the whole list and said, oh, I'll see you in the cafe when you've got my shopping for me.
Yeah, can you pay for it as well?
That would be good.
Oh, that's so funny. So let's begin so tell us about when you had your eating disorder and how you got through that and how you worked through your recovery pathway.
Okay, so for me, it all really started when I was about 12. I was at boarding school in England. I wasn't overweight. I didn't feel overweight. but I wasn't very happy. And so about a week before half term, I decided to stop eating. I didn't know anything about food. I didn't know anything about nutrition, but I just started eating very little. And then I went back to see my family for half term. And of course, they noticed I'd lost weight, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't really understand what was going on. It was obviously a cry for help. And so I just said the school at food was horrible. But that half term, for the first time ever, I was overeating. I mean, my poor body was half starved. So I regained the weight I'd lost. And for the first time in my life, even though I wasn't overweight at that time, I felt overweight.
Yeah, and I think that's a difficulty for so many people, that even though they're not overweight, they feel like they are.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't think you can look at somebody and not know them and say how they feel about their weight.
Yeah.
Because I think with an eating disorder, it doesn't always show on the outside, but a lot is going on internally.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it is unconscious. We don't even realize we have these fleeting thoughts that we're not even aware of some of them.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't really tell you why I decided to stop eating then.
Yeah.
But then, of course, that then led to years of a struggle with food. That was the whole of my start of my struggle with food. And during that time, sometimes I had periods where I ate fairly normally. And sometimes I had periods where I ate very little. And then ultimately that turned into bulimia.
Right. And if you were to look back now, why do you think that those patterns developed?
Well, I think for me, it probably goes right back to when I was born.
Right.
I was premature. I was about 6 weeks early, I think, 5 weeks early. And I was only 3 pounds 10. My mum had preeclampsia and she was quite seriously ill. So my whole birth was very dramatic. And they got me out of my mum as quickly as possible, rushed my mum off to emergency care and rushed me off to an incubator. So I wasn't breastfed, I wasn't bottle fed, I was tube fed.
Right.
And I wasn't held, and I turned into a very anxious baby. I spent my first 5 weeks in hospital. And when I came out, I was quite an anxious baby. I obviously don't remember any of this.
Yeah.
But my mum tells this story about how she looked after a friend's baby. I think it was just for 24 hours. But I did not like having this baby in the house. And my mum said she was sure, she felt sure that I thought she was going to abandon me again. So even though she hadn't actually abandoned me, she didn't see me for the first week of my life, and she didn't hold me until sometime later. And then I grew into an anxious child, which I do remember being highly, highly anxious as a child.
Yeah.
Then
did you get any help when you were younger for anxiety?
No. I mean, I was an anxious child, but I didn't have an eating disorder. But then when I was 10, my family was living in the Caribbean by then. And I was sent to boarding school in England. So my entire life changed in that moment. Everything that was familiar to me changed. And I think I actually spent my first term at boarding school in a sort of state of shock.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Again,
I went to boarding school. I would cry every night. Every night I was just so distraught and hated it. And that went on for years.
I don't think boarding schools are the same now. But when I went to boarding school, it was this very impersonal place. We weren't allowed toys, we weren't allowed teddy, we weren't allowed photos of our families, we weren't allowed posters, we weren't allowed music. So it was kind of a bit like a prison camp. So that within 2 years of that, that's when I stopped eating. So I think probably this is true for many people. I don't think there's necessarily one thing on its own that triggers it. I think it's probably a build-up of different circumstances and different contributing factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember my mother, because of the food, and you were given one type of food. If you didn't like it, you didn't eat it, and then you were starving. So my mother would give me lots of biscuits and things, and we would secretly, me and my friends, sneak off and eat these biscuits. And I'm sure that had, another strain to the reason why I had bulimia and all the secrecy around food.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And So how old were you when the bulimia raised its ugly head?
Well, I think I tried once when I was a teenager, but I actually, it's actually not that easy to do. So I didn't then purge until I was actually in my very early 20s.
Right.
And then it lasted for a couple of years. And then I got it under control just using sheer willpower. I still had that desire to do it, but I wasn't. I was eating on the outside. I was eating fairly normally, actually. But inside, my body was so out of balance and I was craving food and I was wanting to overeat, and I kind of held it all together. But obviously that doesn't really work long term.
No.
And then I had some more stressful circumstances came up in my life, and I had a very short-lived period where I was bulimic again in my mid-20s. And then I saw a very good clinical psychologist and I worked with her. So even though I was no longer bulimic when I went to see her, I still had that. It was like my head was still bulimic, in my head. And I worked with her for a while, and there wasn't a moment where it just stopped, but I kind of realized that I no longer craved food in the same way. I no longer wanted to behave in that way. It was like it just wasn't a part of me anymore. And I really would like to say this to everybody, because when I was bulimic, I thought it was something I'd have to learn to live with, or something that would just be there to some extent in me all the time. But actually it's not. If you think back, there was probably a time when you had a fairly normal relationship with food, and it is possible to get back to that again.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. I never, ever, it never crosses my mind, because I had bulimia for 15 years. And now it never crosses my mind to even ever think about making myself sick whatsoever, or going on a big binge or anything.
Yeah, it's just not something you want to do anymore.
No. Oh gosh, no. But I don't even think about it at all. It never crosses my mind.
Yeah. So it really is possible to be completely free of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important to know. I remember I'd wake up in the morning sometimes, like it was almost like I had a few moments of freedom. And then within seconds that would kick in. Oh no, this is what my life is like at the moment. And to everybody on the outside, my life was probably great. I had a good job. I had friends. My life seemed to be working. But of course, inside it wasn't.
Yeah. So when you went to see that psychologist and you said that your head was, you still in your head, you still had bulimia, what did that mean? What did that mean to you back then?
For me, it meant that I didn't have a normal relationship with food. I still thought about food in an obsessive way. I still wanted to overeat. I didn't want's the wrong word, isn't it? But there was still a part of me that was triggering me to carry on eating, that was triggering me to want these sugary foods and things, but I wasn't necessarily acting on it.
Okay. And so then when did you, after that, what happened? Because then you went on to train as a nutritionalist.
Yes, but that actually came sometime later. So I was working in IT actually at the time. And then I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something that felt more meaningful to me. And then at the time I had terrible period pains. And even though, your listeners may or may not have period pains, I think this shows how powerful food is. I mean, the doctors had said to me, the next step is an exploratory operation. And I didn't really want to go there. And I went to see a nutritional therapist, not really believing they were going to help much. Right. But I changed my diet, and she explained to me why it was happening, because of the inflammation in my body. And I changed my diet, and within 3 months,
because of the food,
even though I was still eating normally, I was low in certain nutrients. Right. And after that consultation, I cut out sugar completely, because sugar is very inflammatory. And within 3 months, I never had period pains again. Right. And I think that just shows how powerful food can be, and eating healthily can be. And it wasn't like I was eating badly when I went to that consultation, but I was eating in a way that wasn't good enough for me to get rid of those period pains.
So you cut sugar out?
I cut sugar out. I was low in magnesium. So I took supplements. And also one that's quite important if you have any kind of eating disorder is omega-3 fats. So they're anti-inflammatory,
Right.
But they can also help to regulate your appetite. And many people are low in omega-3 fats. So these are the main sources are oily fish. But they're also in things like chia seed and flaxseed.
Yeah.
And some in green leafy vegetables. So I think it's really important to make sure you're getting enough of those.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about zinc?
Yep, zinc's important too. And zinc is often people who have anorexia are often low in zinc.
And
So,
bulimia, though.
and bulimia, yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, if you're bulimic, you're probably, your whole body is pretty out of balance. So yeah, and zinc is one of those really important ones. In fact, when I was training, they said to me, if you don't know the answer to something, it's probably zinc. It's one of those absolutely critical ones.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So for somebody that has an eating disorder,
Yeah.
that's listening to this, so what specifically, with all your knowledge now, what would you advise?
Okay, well, I think there are some certain things that you can do. And one of them is, I would say, protein is really important because it helps stabilize your blood sugar levels. So if you are going for a long time without eating, your blood sugar levels are dropping, and that can trigger you to overeat. It can trigger you to want sugary foods and carbs.
Yeah.
If you are bulimic, your blood sugar levels are probably all over the place. So I would eat protein with each time you eat. Just a small amount is fine. It doesn't have to be crazy amounts. And I would also look at eating regularly. Try and regulate when you're eating, because you don't want to go for too long without food.
Yeah, because of the blood sugar.
Yes.
Dropping.
Yeah.
Okay. So if somebody was thinking about stepping on that pathway of recovery and starting to eat small amounts, so you're suggesting for them to do it regularly.
Yeah,
to
if
include
they can.
protein.
Yes.
And what else should they do?
Okay, I think one of the really big things that contributes to eating in a complicated way is when we're stressed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that stress may be triggered by something psychological or emotional, but whatever it's triggered by, there is a biochemical component in your body. You're still releasing the stress hormone cortisol. And when you're releasing a lot of cortisol, it's part of your fight and flight response. So your body thinks you've used up a lot of energy fighting or running away, even though you haven't. And so the cortisol triggers you to want sugary and fatty foods.
Yeah.
Because those foods will refuel your body, replenish all that energy that you didn't actually use up, but your body thinks you used up.
Yeah. So
I would say try and find a way of relaxing. It's really, really important to try and keep yourself calm if you can. And actually having an eating disorder is really stressful.
Absolutely. Because it's all you can think about. And
yes.
The pressure that you put on yourself and the perfectionism.
Absolutely. And, there's what relaxes one person is different from another person. Mm. But for me, I always think getting out for a walk in nature is a really, really good thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And taking time out for you and doing what you feel has worked in the past to relax you, or experimenting and finding what relaxes you. I
think you have to experiment, but you were talking about the colouring books you're doing. And actually colouring books for adults is becoming a more popular thing. And one of my children loves colouring books. And I find it so therapeutic, just sitting down and colouring with her. You don't have to worry about being good at art or getting it right. You just do it for fun.
Absolutely. And it's a great way to really focus on what you're colouring in, and the colours and the patterns and everything you can about it, and keep your mind focused on that rather than up in your head and all the negativity that's flying around. So it's a great way to practice mindfulness.
Absolutely, yeah.
Keeping yourself in that present moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I always find colour itself very therapeutic. I love colour.
Yeah.
Seeing those first flowers coming out in the spring, the deep purple of the crocuses, the bright yellow daffodils, there's something very uplifting about it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Breathing in that beautiful colour.
Yes.
Energy.
Ooh,
lovely. Yeah. So, okay. So if somebody listening has an eating disorder, what would you advise them in order to help them along their pathway?
Okay, a number of things really. I think first is talk to somebody. For many people, I didn't talk to anybody about it for years. In fact, not really until I was actually better, apart from this clinical psychologist and one close friend. So if you can talk, if you can get professional help from a clinical psychologist or a psychotherapist or whoever, someone that specializes in eating disorders, ideally.
Yeah.
But I think also it's important to find out what's going on in your body. What in your body is triggering your cravings? What in your body is triggering that desire to overeat? Now, it could be a number of different things. It could be, we've talked about your stress hormones. We've talked about blood sugar imbalances. But chances are your appetite regulation system has also been disrupted. And that can be, you actually have a system in your body that works to keep your appetite at the right level for you. But it can be overridden by a number of things. And one of them is constantly overeating. But another is things like monosodium glutamate in processed foods. So I would say for a number of reasons, it's really important to try and eat as natural a diet as possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, if you're low, like we talked about omega-3 fats, if you're low in certain nutrients, that can also trigger the desire to overeat. So it's really important to eat a natural, healthy diet where you're getting all the nutrients that you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And going back to when you overcame bulimia, what were your reasons to recover?
Do you know what? There wasn't one set event or one specific thing that made it happen. I just didn't want to live like that anymore. I mean, if anyone's listening, they'll know what a horrible way it is to live.
Yeah.
You know, it takes over your life. It takes over your mind. And you don't want to be living like that. And I was really determined to get out of it, but I didn't know how. And so for me, we're going back 30 odd years. And there just wasn't the help available then in the way that there is now.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's more talked about. You know, if you're hearing this podcast for the first time, join Kate's group. You know, this is a group dedicated to solving eating disorders. Join that. Talk to somebody.
Yeah. And it's understanding that you're not alone. And like you say, there's so many different avenues that you can go and connect with others that have an eating disorder. You know, if you just go on Facebook, there's many different eating disorders sites on there, on Instagram,
Yeah.
for you to find people to connect and hear their stories.
I mean, absolutely, because you're not alone. And it's coming out more and more, you know, how many people are just suffering with eating disorders.
Yeah. So if you could turn back the clock to that young you at boarding school, what would you say to her to help her to, you know, maybe rethink the negative eating disorders patterns that she got into?
Well, if I could go back and talk to my 12-year-old self, I'd say, don't stop eating. Don't undereat. It's going to lead to more problems in the future. It's going to lead to a whole load of problems. You know, not stopping eating is not the way to go, because at that point of time, I could have, later on, it would have been hard to change those patterns. If at the very beginning, I hadn't stopped eating, if I'd found another way of dealing with my issues, then, you know, it could have been very different.
Yeah. And it's talking about how you're feeling.
Absolutely.
Finding a friend that you can trust, maybe.
Yeah.
Or a parent or a sibling that you can trust, that you can open up to and talk about how you're feeling and start to unravel those difficult thoughts that you have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or even, you know, if you haven't got anybody to talk to, even journaling would be a real positive key, because so many of my clients, they find it so powerful to write down all of those struggling thoughts, feelings that they have.
Yeah.
Because then they can begin to let them go by writing.
I personally didn't journal because it hadn't even occurred to me to do it, honestly. but I think it would have been a really helpful thing to do.
Yeah. I had a 5-year diary when I was at boarding school. And I must say it was, I didn't write in great depth. It was quite monotonous when I read it now. But I got this 5-year diary and I was so excited I was going to complete it every day for 5 years. And my older brother said to me, okay, if you do complete that and write in it every day, I'll give you £5. And, you know, this was in the 1800s. So, and the £5 was so much money to me, and I was so excited and I couldn't believe it. And so I did. So I filled it out every day for 5 years. And then on that New Year's Eve, I went to him and I said, look, I finished it. Look, tomorrow you owe me £5. You owe me £5. And he said, well, look, Hanksy, he calls me Hanksy. Look, Hanksy, if you want that £5, you've got to let me read the diary.
Wow.
Honestly, a typical older brother. So I never did get my £5. Oh gosh. So anyway, so you've been working for a number of years as a nutritionalist, and then you decided that you were going to write a book. So what brought that about? What made you decide?
Oh, goodness me. It's actually quite a long story. So I qualified as a nutritional therapist. Oh, it was 12 years ago. I did my final, handed in my final essays and things 3 weeks before my daughter was born. So it was kind of a crazy, cutting it to the limit. Yeah. And actually, because I was premature myself, I was studying in London, and I got my partner to come up with me for my final lectures. Because I thought, oh no, what if my baby comes early? But it was all fine. So, but when I was still in training clinic, I had a client who came to me to lose weight. Now, I could only see this client twice. But what happened was we worked out this plan together for her eating, and we were both quite happy with it, and she was quite excited. So she came back to see me again 4 weeks later, and I was really excited about seeing her again. She was this lovely lady, and she came back and she'd actually gained 0.5 stone.
Oh.
So, but I couldn't see her again. But she had this plan, but she hadn't been able to stick to the plan. So that got me thinking, like, you know, what does someone need to stick to the plan? And I didn't know. And I talked to a friend who was a psychotherapist, and do you know what? We talked about it for years, and I started researching it. And then we decided to write a book. So we wrote every other chapter effectively. And then we tried to get it published, but didn't get anywhere. So we started running courses and working with people who are overweight and putting our research into practice. And that carried on for a couple of years. And then COVID hit.
Right.
And everything got more complicated, and we had to absolutely simplify everything. And I realized that not everybody needed, some people need the psychological side, other people don't. Because once you start to bring your body back into balance, it affects the hormones, the neurotransmitters, it affects your mood, everything.
Yeah.
So then I ran a course on my own, and it was really successful. I mean, it was people were making really big changes, and it was very much tailored to them finding what worked for them. So each week we looked at making one small step.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody's different. So it's figuring out what works for you. Yeah.
And for all your listeners, there's no one thing that's going to work for everybody. And it's going to take a bit of trial and error. Sometimes something won't work, but then if you carry on with it, then it will start to work. But just the sheer act of trying to make a change can help.
Yeah.
And not being judgmental about yourself, not beating yourself up when something doesn't work. So let's say you decide that you're going to start the week, I don't know, with a really healthy breakfast every day. And then one day it doesn't work and you end up binging, or you end up having something completely unhealthy. Learn from it. Don't beat yourself up about it. Think about what went wrong and think about how you can do it differently next time.
Yeah.
And actually just accept it's never going to be perfect all the time. But it was from that course that ultimately I then wrote the book. So my first half of the book, and this, even though my book is it's on the surface, it looks like it's about weight loss, but actually it's about setting up the conditions in your body so you no longer crave food, setting up the conditions in your body so you no longer want to overeat, setting up the conditions in your body so you no longer store fat around your belly, so you're no longer giving your body the message to store fat.
Yes.
And what's contributing to this is going to be different in different people. So in part 1 of the book, there's a series of very short chapters, each with a questionnaire. So you can do that questionnaire and find out if that particular imbalance is relevant to you. So by the end of part 1, you know if stress is contributing to your cravings, you know if blood sugar imbalances are contributing to your cravings, you know if your female hormones are playing a role.
Yeah, so you can learn in each chapter.
Yes. And then
about you specifically.
Yes, it's absolutely specifically about you. So let's say that you are binging. Maybe for you, stress is the key factor. But maybe for somebody else, it's because their appetite regulation or their stress hormones are playing a bigger role. So then in part 2, it's a step-by-step process you go through. And in each step, you tailor it to the imbalances in your body, and you tailor it to your food preferences. Because let's say you've got a meat eater and a vegan, they can both bring their bodies into balance, but they're probably going to do it in very different ways.
Yeah.
Or if you have food intolerances, again, you have to work around that. And food intolerance is something else that can contribute to cravings as well.
Right.
So the whole idea, whether you are overweight or whether you have an eating disorder, it's a process that you can follow that will help you find out about you and what works for you.
Yeah. And it's an excellent book. It's called The Body Effect.
Thank you.
It really is. It's really insightful and so helpful because you can learn about yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And how is the book doing?
Do you know what? It's been a crazy, crazy week. It only went live on Amazon 10 days ago. Right. And it had the #1 new release for 8 days. Then it became an Amazon bestseller.
And it's a bestseller.
It's a bestseller.
Amazing.
So it has been a crazy journey. And I'm loving reading all the reviews, and I'm loving it that people are emailing me with their feedback. It's just been incredible.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Fantastic. How exciting. I'm so pleased. So is there anything lastly that you would say to our anyone listening that that would help to motivate them and take that step forward wherever they may be in their recovery path?
Oh, I think, so again, for everyone, it's going to be very different. And I think just living with an eating disorder is really difficult. And your life can be so much better. You can get out of it. Now, maybe there's something specific for you that is a trigger for you to recover. And if so, hang on to that. Keep thinking about that. But if you're like me and there wasn't a particular trigger that was motivating you to get better, it's just you don't want to live like that anymore. Just hold in your mind that it absolutely is possible.
Yeah.
You can change it. You can get your life back. You can eat normally again.
Yeah, which may only be a dream right now, but you can take those steps forward. And
absolutely, but both Kate, you and myself, we've both been there, and we both absolutely know that it is possible to get out of that.
Yes, it is. And particularly now with all the help that people can get, through books, podcasts, audiobooks, online.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I something just come into my head?
Oh yes.
And I was just thinking this is something I wish I had heard many years ago, when I had my own problems. And it relates also to what you say in your book, about that pause between the desire to binge and then actually binging.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, if you're going to binge, I know from experience it's going to happen. But we judge food by what we see more than by the feelings in our body. So what can be helpful is if you're going to binge, put everything you're going to eat on a plate, because chances are if you're binging and you're eating really fast, you've actually got no idea of what you're really eating. So put everything that you're going to eat on that plate, and then sit down at a table and don't watch TV, don't have distractions, just purely focus on that plate of food. And remember, you can stop at any time if you want to, you can. But if you can't and you're going to eat it, then if you're going to eat it anyway, eat it slowly. Don't shovel it down. And you may find you can stop before you get to the end of that plate, and you may not. But if you can, great. And if you can't, you've still slowed down the eating, and chances are you're going to eat less.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because most of the time when we go on a binge, it's unconscious, and we're not aware of what we're eating. We're just, shoveling it in. But by stopping and taking that time out and actually looking at the food that you're eating and eating slowly, consciously, then you are much less likely to eat that whole plate of food, because it'll bring you back into the conscious, and you'll be aware of what you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah. And also by slowing it down, you're starting to get out of the habit of shoveling it in, of eating too fast.
Yeah. That's really good advice. I love that, Dawn. Well, thank you very much. Now, how can people find you?
Well, my website is dawncuckow.com.
Right.
They can go on there, or they can email me, dawn@dawncuckow.com. Or if you can go onto Amazon and find my book on there. Just type in The Body Effect into Amazon and it will take you to it. And do you know what? I wrote this book, really, it was aimed at weight loss, but actually it's equally valuable for people with eating disorders. But if you read it, I'd love to hear from you, hear what you think about it.
Yeah.
Please email me. I would love to hear from you.
Yeah. And how you have learned from the questions at the end of each chapter, those powerful questions.
Yeah, I'd love to hear how you've changed your life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So would I.
I suppose.
So good. Well, Dawn, thank you so much, for your honesty and, all of the important, helpful advice that you've given. This has been excellent. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kate.
Oh, thank you, Dawn. So that's all for today's episode of Bulimia Sucks. And thank you to everybody for listening. And before we go, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast on Apple iTunes so you never miss an episode. And of course, let us know what you think and show some love, your favorite podcast, by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. And I look forward to chatting with you in the next episode.